Okay, a big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. This extremely warm for late April here in the UK Wednesday afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined from a tin-roofed shed, Rebecca Ward. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of the show this afternoon.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me and having me here.
Now, I've just suggested that you're in a tin shed. Can you just provide a little bit more context for our listeners and viewers as to exactly where you are recording from today?
Of course. So I work here at Radby Elder. We're based in London, and during the pandemic, someone had the great idea, I think, of introducing these sheds for our meetings, the many Zoom meetings of the day, which have lovely tin roofs and are particularly warm on hot days. But we'll manage to do it, I think.
I love that, Rebecca. I think I mentioned to you in our preamble that we record from a Georgian office block here in Exeter, and we have like a 2-day window when it's actually bearable in here from cold to hot, and we've tipped now over into the long hot summer. So yeah, I'm feeling your pain, if you like, in terms of the heat for today's recording. But anyway, let's move on. Rebecca, we've got 20 minutes or so to learn about you, essentially, and learn about your background and experience. And obviously, with the nature of our show, like, we're really fortunate to be able to ask people about, their formative experiences, their childhood experiences, adolescence, early part of adulthood, relating to their experience of, right and wrong, of ethics, of, responsibility, and of sustainability. So start wherever you like, but just take us back to the origins in the beginning and tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I suppose I'll start maybe start by saying I'm very aware that I'm sort of late-ish 20s now. I'm relatively early in my career, and it could sound a bit haughty talking about the journey I've been on, but you asked, so I will do my best to tell.
And just to interrupt you, but don't worry, I've got plenty of looking forward for the rest of your career questions to come as well. So you're not going to get away with it that easy, but go on.
Perfect. So yeah, when I was at school, I was always really interested in science. That felt like my kind of area of not necessarily expertise at that age, but the place that I enjoyed the lessons the most, as well as doing lots of sport. I loved playing sport at school as well. But I loved kind of chemistry, maths, physics, and I also had a fantastic geography teacher who got me really interested in geography, but I felt like I was still doing a bit better at the sciences. And so when I got to kind of A-levels and looking at universities and what I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to keep this science and maths involved. I really loved maths, but I probably wasn't quite good enough to go and do a maths degree. But this geography teacher had instilled a real interest in the environment as well. And I found a degree called geophysics, which most people, when I tell them that's what I studied, haven't heard of. It's real. I didn't make it up. I've not just combined the words geography and physics. But it kind of is that as a degree. It's looking at using maths and physics concepts to understand the processes that happen from kind of the core of the Earth all the way up to the atmosphere. And I loved it. It was fantastic. But while doing that degree, I had a couple of modules and particular lectures as well that got me like even more so interested in things like climate change. I think you hear a lot about climate change at the minute. You maybe hear some people that are trying to pretend it's not real, but these lecturers were able to describe it and put out the evidence in such a way that it felt so undeniable that I just couldn't ignore it, basically. And then sort of a skip to the end of my degree, did this great course or module that everyone that did my course chose to do this module if they're doing 4 years, because it culminated in a field trip to the US. In my instance, that field trip got cancelled because of COVID. But nonetheless, you spend the year kind of preparing a bit of a lecture on a topic you're interested in from your degree, but specific to the place in the US we were. And so me and my partner did it all about the wildfires in California and trying to understand if the kind of increasing prevalence of those could be attributed to climate change. So got to really dive into the really sciencey data of that.
And Rebecca, sorry to interrupt you, but just for context, we're not talking about the most recent LA fires, are we? We're talking historical. This is a period of before.
Yeah, so the actual work I was doing would have been during 2020, I think, because that's when COVID was, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And that just shows how many wildfires there's been since, right? But even at the time, there'd just been some particularly terrible wildfires. Unfortunately, it's just continued to be the case. And so those ones we were looking at kind of, are they happening more regularly and worse because of climate change? That we've kind of learned that the climate is incredibly difficult to predict. I'm sure that's not news to anyone. But certain phenomena, because of the kind of physical geography of California, as well as the climate, sort of led us to the conclusion that perhaps, yes, climate change is having a bad impact. But we tried to make it really fun for the rest of our group, who might have been people that were actually studying minerals and rocks. And so they had good understanding, but not of the specific topics we were talking about. So I think we had, we kind of in our slideshow had sort of a detective. And we were kind of encouraging our classmates to play the detective and figure out if the baddie that is climate change was to blame, or if he could walk free or not, or she, I suppose. And that was great fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then that was kind of the end of uni. I graduated into the pandemic, but was lucky enough to have a grad scheme sort of job offer. So I moved down to Reading, working at a big manufacturing firm doing an environmental role. It was very compliance oriented. So I was kind of doing what I wanted to be doing, but it wasn't maybe quite as exciting and wasn't able to create the change I was really interested in. But nonetheless, learned lots. I guess because it is a manufacturing firm, the kind of gender split of the company was such that it was about 25% women across the company. And so I got quite involved in what was called the Gender Balance Working Group as well. It was kind of a side hustle to my actual job there, but got really interested in understanding and educating the rest of the workforce in kind of the challenges women in particular are facing in that company. And in sort of, it was a very STEM based, science, technology, engineering, mathematics based company. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that role, or that part of what I chose to do whilst working there. But I just wanted to do something where I felt like I was creating a bit more change, where I could actually bring both that environmental and social side a bit closer in the work I was doing. And I also really wanted to move out of Reading. So I was lucky enough to end up with the job I currently have here at Radley Elder, where I work as a now senior sustainability strategist and get to work across communications, strategy, and campaigns work with clients from all over the world. I love it. It's very varied. I get to practice all sorts of different skills, talk to lots of interesting people, including yourself. And yeah, that's kind of where I am now. I've been here nearly 3 years.
Rebecca, that was a brilliant introduction. And I should say, for any of our listeners and viewers that want to go and check out the more of the detail of Rebecca's career to date, then we'll obviously share Rebecca's LinkedIn profile so you guys can go and check out. And we'll obviously share ROI's website details as well, so people can check out their brilliant work as well. I want to take you back, though. You brilliantly described your kind of educational experience and what you were interested in and what you leaned into. But you've also, during that introduction, talked about impact and talked about, what having more of an impact, and that's why you moved to RY from the manufacturing firm that you're working for. When you think back to kind of the early those sort of educational experiences that you went through growing up, what did impact mean to you, do you think, then? And how has that evolved as you found yourself now in a senior position working at RY? Like, how has that sort of evolved during your working experience?
Great question. I think it's maybe relevant to mention I was never a child, or I'm a person now that was like, I want to be a doctor or teacher or something when I was younger. And so I've always just tried to take the next decision based on what I think will be interesting or enjoyable. So like that degree, I just knew I wanted to keep the science and maybe a bit of geography together, and found this almost like someone had made this perfect degree. And then when I went into work as well, I've never had a kind of plan as to what it was specifically I wanted to do. In fact, when I started my degree, I probably didn't even know you could have a job called a sustainability strategist. But I think most people in the world, probably most people listening to this, want to have a job where they feel like they're making a positive impact in the world. Like, you want a reason to get out of bed and come to work in the morning. And I think that's probably maintained as a idea for me from when you're talking about kind of at school and choosing a degree and whatnot to now. Whenever I feel like someone or something is benefiting from the work we're doing, which I think can be challenging sometimes, right? If I'm working on reporting, it can feel like we're just putting a document out in the world about what's already happened. But really, what it can do, a report, is highlight particular areas that haven't gone so well, or share good practice so that maybe others in the industry can learn from you. It can inspire colleagues, employees that might not have known about sustainability in the context of their business, that they can actually play a role in that. So I think sometimes it's about being a bit creative about how you look about specifically what you're producing, but hopefully everything we do is helping.
And I think that's such an interesting and important point, that notion of, and I'm going to use huge generalizations here, but those of us working in sustainability, understanding that there are so many micro cogs at play, if you like, in this otherwise great machine that we're trying to develop and evolve together, and that you've got to take that step back and look at that broader picture of understanding that the cog that you're working on, it really is significant, and it is supporting the development of things in the correct direction. Rebecca, I want to ask you about I want you to get your crystal ball out here. I always ask this question and I'm fascinated, as you say, somebody at the early part of their career, I'm really interested to get your view of this. But with your crystal ball out, like, if you think about the rest of your career from this point forward, what does success look like?
I'm particularly interested at the moment in materiality, which I think is shifting and evolving at a pace like never before, probably in part thanks to CSRD. And a lot of people might not use the word thanks and CSRD in the same sentence. But it's bringing together the outward impact that us more kind of classically sustainability focused people maybe have been thinking about for a while, but with this financial impact as to how is sustainability actually impacting a company? We've been talking about climate change for a while now and how flooding might start to affect you as a company, but how do you start to benefit from the vastness that is sustainability, and how might you actually be facing some risks? And I think for me, success is being able to quantify that in a way that really gets the attention of leaders in businesses who might not every day talking about sustainability, but if we can raise their awareness with enough justification that actually, if you don't start focusing on certain aspects of sustainability, your company is going to really suffer, or it's not going to be able to take opportunities that you might be able to. And here's the financial figure that proves that, because I think that's what's going to get people's attention. So I'm on a bit of a mission, not that I don't really have any finance or economics background, but it's something I can try and learn more about and speak with the right people to understand, so that we can hopefully get further along that journey.
And it's interesting, Rebecca, because you've already described how, like, you've kind of at different stages during your education into your career, you've kind of just allowed your curiosity and your interest to lead your attention. And I think that's in fact, to be honest, it's a commonality that's coming out in a lot of the conversations I'm having with people, senior, successful people, just saying, take that next stage of passionate enthusiasm for something and lean into it and be as interested in it as you can. And that will then create the next stage of opportunity that you then take on from there. This sounds like this possibly will be one of your next leanings in of curiosity, is into that sort of financial externality side of analysis when it comes to sustainability, and are going to be fascinating. Big question. Sorry, me just rambling on and commenting on what you're saying, but big question for you here. And again, I want you to take a slight sort of step back. When you think about, and we're going to come on to talk about the S of ESG in a moment and sort of focus on that, but just taking the environmental aspect of sustainability, like when you look at everything that you know about clients, about the science, about, you know, where we're trending, etc., how hopeful or not are you relating to the prospect of managing to address the environmental sustainability issues at play?
It's tricky, isn't it? I think in our line of work, it can become quite overwhelming quite easily. I was just having a conversation at lunchtime with a colleague about how apparently one of the solutions people are talking about is cloud seeding and how that will help reduce global warming. And I sort of exasperatedly was just like, well, why can't we just concentrate on reducing emissions? That's surely the simplest answer here. But I think some of the clients I work with make me feel better about it. Some of them don't. I really interestingly work with some clients in sort of real estate and construction, and in London particularly. In order to get planning permission, you have to be doing it in the most sustainable way possible, or the most realistically sustainable way. And that kind of intersection of policy kind of forcing businesses in certain ways, I think, will play quite a big role. And it's great to see that that's already happening in some sectors. Others, it's going to be harder, but we can but hope. I think you have to remain optimistic in this job, or kind of what's the point?
So true. It's so true. Is that the London plan? Is that the building reg that's in play in London that requires?
I don't know the specifics of what the name of the plan or the policy, but we did some materiality work with this particular client and got to interview some of the people that give them planning permission. So like the City of London and certain borough councils. So they kind of shared with us what they look for in planning applications.
Yeah, interesting, really interesting. And as you say, and it's fascinating. It is that thing. It's like you don't want to be naive to the reality of things, but you also need to take energy, if you like. And you mentioned about waking up every day feeling like your work's having an impact. You have to wake up every day with the sense that impact is gonna, if there are enough of us waking up attempting to do that, then ultimately we're going to realize some positive outcomes, as you say. Otherwise, what's the point? We can all give up and sort of put our feet up and wait for the world to end, which is an odd way to finish the first conversation. But Rebecca, thank you for being so open and telling us a little bit more about your kind of story to date. As I mentioned, we'll link to various profiles, etc., in our materials. Moving forward now, and I love how you managed to mention a little bit about your experience of working in that manufacturing company and working on gender equality based issues. Would you mind just introducing the article that we agreed upon? I think it was Antonelli di Marzizo, which I probably butchered, so I apologize sincerely, Antonelli, if you're listening in William and Mary from, I think it was March 2024. You mind just providing just a bit of a summary, bit of an overview for our listeners and viewers, and then just picking out whatever you thought were the most interesting points made?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the article comes out of a uni over in America who are highlighting the kind of positives and the benefits that can come from studying both the STEM subjects and more artsy, creative subjects. I actually made a little note myself that it was quite interesting. This has come out of the US, where you can, I don't have a fantastic knowledge of the US education system, but I've heard about the kind of double majors and the minors of university there, and we don't necessarily get that opportunity in the UK. We have to really sort of choose one particular topic and study that. But that's a bit of a side note on education systems.
but just on that, Rebecca, did you find that was sort of it allowed for that kind of flexibility of curiosity and of interest to play out in the way that you study? Was that your takeaway from it?
Yeah, I think it would have done that. I very much felt, presumably through the messaging I'd had throughout school and university, that because science was the thing I was best at, arts and writing was the thing I was not particularly good at. It kind of felt like a seesaw almost. And so I would always get my friends who did more artsy subjects to proofread stuff for me, because I knew that they'd be able to edit the grammar and stuff properly. And then in my final year at uni, my course offered a module on how to write. And I was like, why have we waited until the final year for this? But it was fantastic. And I really, my confidence in writing grew massively through that. And it was kind of how to write for science. But even so, I think and we maybe will speak later, but I've really found my voice in writing kind of blogs and articles here at RY. And I think if it wasn't for that module that gave me the confidence to write, I probably wouldn't be doing that. Maybe all these ideas would still be in my head, and imagine where we'd be then.
Stop it. And we'd be poorer for it. Indeed. But I get it. What you're, again, regurgitating back what you were saying, it's that sense of the missed opportunities that we have by pigeonholing and polarizing when it comes to education, and actually the traditional view that art-based or creative-based pursuits and science-based pursuits cannot entwine and affect and support one another is limiting in terms of our view of education. Sorry, but you made that note about the article, but do carry on and give us a bit of a summary of the piece.
Yeah, definitely. And so essentially the article features two students that have done this combining of STEM and more arts topics as part of their degree, and two kind of projects they've worked on. One of them is a film writer that's used their kind of knowledge of physics to have the grounded understanding to be able to talk about and write about nuclear fission, but has really raised the role of a particular woman who kind of discovered important concepts in nuclear fission. And it's that story that we're hearing more and more now, where the woman that was involved didn't really get any credit. It wasn't written into the history books. And so this student has used their STEM and creative side to tell that person's story through the art of film. And the other is...
And sorry to interrupt, but just to give the name, if you like, it was and again, I'll butcher it. I think it's Lisa Meitner.
Yes. I don't know how you pronounce that either.
well, thank you for letting me struggle away. You had it in front of me. You thought, I'll just let Charlie have a go at it. Lisa, I know you're not around anymore, but apologies if I butchered your name. But anyway, no, sorry, do carry on. So she's the physicist that was highlighted in Lily's work. Yeah,
definitely. Thank you so much for pulling me up on that, because it would have been pretty awful for me to mention the unnamed woman and not name her. So thank you. And the other kind of student that's highlighted in the article had written all about maths and a lot of the women throughout history who have made really important breakthroughs. And she talks as well about kind of how her grounded knowledge in the concepts of maths really helped her to be able to translate these achievements in ways that maybe made sense to the less technical audiences that could still learn about these women from mathematical history. And yeah, I think it makes a really nice point that I think there's a few reasons that we should be combining STEM and the arts. The one that I think is brought through this article is that if we want to get more women and young girls interested in science and then studying it, potentially then having a career in it, they need to see the role models and feel inspired by them. And things like film and books and TV and radio are famously good mediums for doing that. And actually, I suppose in today's world, it's short form media like TikTok and Instagram. I don't know if it comes up on your feed, but in the UK, Hannah Fry I think she's a maths professor at Oxford, but she does really wonderful Instagram reels. I don't have TikTok, so I watch them all a couple of weeks later on Instagram, where she kind of demystifies lots of maths concepts and applies them to the real world as well. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here maybe, but I remember having a really good maths teacher who I think was good because before each new topic, he would explain, how is this relevant to something in the real world? And it gave you a bit more of a reason to be interested and want to understand it. But yeah, I think people having those combined skill sets of being able to understand the science as well as being able to tell a engaging story, but at the right level for the audience is really vital in, first of all, uncovering those stories from the past where women have been involved and we haven't heard about it, but piquing interest.
Can I, Rebecca, that was, by the way, that was brilliantly summarized. For those listeners and viewers that want to check out the original article, we'll obviously link to it so you guys can check it out. But Rebecca's nailed that in terms of the key elements of it. Can I ask you, Rebecca, I want to ask a personal reflection question, if you like. You mentioned, obviously, you're a young woman thinking about what you want to do next, and you're inspired and interested in STEM-based subjects, etc. What was your experience like of being a girl, being a woman, interested in this area, and like did not having those kind of role models, and was there any kind of pushback in terms of the way that you were viewed, and just talk us through your lived experience of being a woman who was interested in STEM or is interested.
Yes, thank you. Definitely. I think relevant for the conversation, I went to an all-girls school. I think that's relevant because I don't know the sort of, I'm sure there's studies behind it, but the ability to put your hand up and ask questions when you don't understand at that kind of school age, when you only then have fellow young girls around you, I think is easier for most girls. So I think that probably played a relatively big role. And it wasn't until I started working in that gender balance working group, my first job, that I heard lots of other women talk about having imposter syndrome. And I was like, oh, weird. I haven't really heard of that before. It doesn't hugely chime with me, which might sound a bit like a boast or a brag. Really, I think I was just quite lucky to have not had that. But I think a lot of it is down to that single-sex education system, but also teachers and parents who made me feel quite like asking. I really think asking questions is the best thing anyone can ever do. Not only will it help you understand something, but it will help pick potential holes in the way that things maybe have just always been done, and understanding why they've always been done that way might help kind of uncover better ways of doing things.
Rebecca, sorry to interrupt you, but that is a fantastic point about asking questions, because I think, like, especially in a young person, if you can instill the confidence to ask questions so that they don't feel like, oh, if I'm having to ask a question about something, that reflects poorly on me for not understanding it, and I need to in some way have the bravado to present that I do understand something when I actually possibly don't. Like, that's a brilliant thing to cultivate in young people, to say, look, have the confidence to ask a question. Sorry, I interrupt you, but I just think that's a really beautiful reflection.
No, thank you. I agree. And maybe we should be asking ourselves as the presenters or teachers as to whether we've explained something sufficiently. If people are having to ask questions, I don't know. Not that I'm saying it's a bad reflection if anyone ever asks you a question. Where was I talking about kind of my experience, I suppose, and then studying STEM. I then did a degree which was very science heavy. There was quite noticeably fewer women doing my course than men, but I also was in a very small cohort. I think in my final year there was 15 of us in total, which for a uni degree is pretty small. And so we just had really close relationships with our lecturers. I had the same throughout school, and I think that really helped me. It felt less like this kind of teacher on the higher plane and student down here. It was more balanced and kind of reciprocal, which I think comes back to that question point as well.
And then crucially, Rebecca, your first real experience then of seeing this kind of, this sort of the lack of sort of gender equality, if you like, in your sort of vision, if you like, was when you joined this manufacturing firm. And then, as you say, it was it 25% of the staff were women, the rest men?
Yeah.
And what did that, like, what was that experience like? And obviously it led you to working in this working group. Like, what inspired you to get involved in that? Like, what were the things that you saw about, other women's experiences that you wanted to help change? Like, just talk us through what happened in that context.
So I think I was in the environment team within that business, which was relatively well balanced. But you would then go out on placements and be in particular kind of sections of the firm which were manufacturing sort of certain items. And in some of those it wasn't a very joined up company because of that. There was pockets that I would then hear about from some of my colleagues in the environment team had gone out to these areas and would come back with stories where the language being used to them and the kind of comments, it's not necessarily a direct quote, but it's things like the whole, oh, just smile, love, or oh, can you do that for me? Thanks, girls. When you're like a working professional woman that quite knock your confidence, I think, and make you question kind of what you're doing there. And so when I heard that was going on, even though I wasn't experiencing it, it kind of felt like I can't really just stand by, but I also can't necessarily go to this particular person and say, you can't do that, especially being only a graduate at the time. So it was a way of trying to make a difference, I suppose.
And on that, so when you look, and again, I'm going to go back to big generalizations here, so sorry about that, but when you think about kind of why these things still happen, I suppose, in this day and age, like, what's your take? Like, why do we have within the STEM sectors these kind of standards of male communication, etc.?
I think it comes from never having someone there to call out that behavior and perhaps explain why it's not appropriate. I don't believe like this 75, oh no, it obviously wasn't the whole 75% of the workforce, but that it was coming from a bad place, or that they wanted to offend anyone or upset anyone, but they didn't know they were. And if they didn't know they were, they didn't know to change that behavior, which I think then in the working group, what we tried to do through kind of webinars and the like was raise awareness of exactly that kind of, this is how that comment could be construed if you are not a white man who's been working here for many, many years and that kind of thing.
And so it's really about education and awareness is the way that we address this. In light of that, I want to again ask you an even bigger, broader question. We've obviously seen, especially within the kind of current geopolitical climate, the sort of redaction of a lot of DEI based initiatives. Like, when you've just so clearly identified how we resolve some of these issues, like what are the, if you were to talk to a company or talk to a client who was thinking about pulling back on some of their DEI programs, what would be your pitch to them in terms of why they shouldn't and why they should continue to invest in them?
Great question, and something we're actively dealing with kind of almost on a daily occurrence at the minute. I think there's a few parts to it. So first off, rounding back to my comments about kind of the financial impact of some of these things, there is actually already quite a bit of evidence out there that having a more diverse workforce, because it increases or it reduces kind of group thought and that echo chamber, increases the diversity of ideas just because of diversity of backgrounds, which is going to help us come up with the solutions, those really creative solutions that we need right now. It's people coming in and asking, why are we doing it like this? Because it doesn't make as much sense to them based on their background. That's going to be really helpful going forward. And it's not just things like helping to solve climate change. It's also just how to be a good business and sort of adapt to the changing markets, I think. But then I also think, while I obviously don't agree with most, if not all, of the people and points regarding this kind of backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we can't ignore it either. We can't just put kind of earmuffs on and not listen. Some of the points being raised are necessary for us to hear. And I think there's a group of typically white men, perhaps in the working class, in this country at least, who feel like they've been ignored and left behind and kind of trodden on through a lot of these efforts to try and make the world a better place for women and people that aren't white. But that's not the point. The point of it's called diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's supposed to be for everyone. So I also think this is an important time to like take a step back and look at how we're approaching this and sense check it is really the best approach at the minute and ask those questions. And maybe we'll find that there's actually slightly different ways we could be doing this that creates an approach that works for everyone, because that's what it should do. It should work for everyone.
And Rebecca, and just so I'm absolutely clear on this, what you're saying there is that perhaps some of the concerns raised about the DEI movement, although we might not agree with the overall stance of retraction and redaction of related to these sorts of initiatives, there are things that we can learn about how to make these initiatives better. And that's ultimately why we keep our ears listening to the ground. I want to swing this back slightly. It's fascinating and really interesting to hear that you're having these kind of conversations with clients and you're working on this kind of stuff as well. I want to swing back to the article like slightly and talking about STEM in particular. How much damage do you think, like, I think in the article it referred to the notion of girl math or maths. How impactful from a cultural kind of media perspective are terms like that, do you think, on women pursuing STEM-based careers?
It's a funny one where I think a lot, like myself and some of my friends, do refer to that term, or there's the kind of "I'm just a girl" phrase that goes around as well, and it can be quite a fun tongue-in-cheek comment when it's used in jest, but I suppose by the people that it's about. It's more maybe going back to when you asked me about at my old job and in that manufacturing and what was going on. It's then when it gets used by people that maybe don't really have the right to be talking about it in that way, that it becomes a lot more damaging. Yes, the messaging behind it, full stop, is damaging, but a lot of people have a dark sense of humor, and if it's used in small circles with the right people, then I'm not saying no one can have a joke. But yeah, I think people are starting to raise. I've seen a few things around social media making the same point, that it's quite a damaging trend when we start kind of applying it beyond just the idea that cash is free money.
It's been a common theme throughout this conversation so far, really alluding to like the standards of communication more generally, and how interpersonal communication between colleagues, and talking about different people from different backgrounds, and how they go about communicating, and I guess realizing the context within that relationship within which they can start making jokes, but understanding when they've got to that point. Do you think there's a bigger, broader issue at play just about the way that we are socially as a population, and that we need to just get better at those interpersonal ways of communicating with each other?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value placed on your ability to make people laugh. Maybe it's a British thing, I don't know. But that can make people laugh at any expense. And I think that's how kind of like bullying starts. And I think it's how these sort of microaggressions become microaggressions.
Mm. And what do you see as, like, you've spoken beautifully about your kind of educational experience and the fact that you had this really supportive, like nurturing school experience. And yes, it was single sex, but and therefore you just never had a question mark about feeling confident asking questions and engaging with people in that way. But what's the solution to some of these kind of communication challenges in society? Is it again, does it come back to what we talked about earlier, awareness, education, or is there something else more fundamental at play? Are we gonna bring the horror of social media into this as well?
Maybe, but let's not for now. I think it falls into that bucket of all the things that are really helpful to know in life that you don't get taught at school. And we do, or we did, at least when I was at school. It's probably got a different name now, kind of PSHE, and it's not very practical information, and it certainly wasn't, at least when I was at school, it wasn't about how you interact with people with compassion, and how you build relationships, friendships, workplace relationships, romantic relationships and like kind of the expectations that are realistic to have, but also how you should sort of feel confident to be treated. We just don't get taught that, do we? I don't personally go to therapy, but I know a lot of people do and say it's one of those things that everyone should do. And perhaps we could start in school kind of making those types of conversations more commonplace.
Rebecca, I will going to come on and have your magic wand suggestion for the commercial world. But I think on just a broader point, that's a brilliant observation, that we aren't taught in any sort of formal setting as we grow up how to go about developing relationships, and developing and nurturing and maintaining relationships is a core and fundamental for all aspects of your life. So why wouldn't we offer some sort of support and guidance to young people in that sense? If anyone's listening in that can do anything about that, I strongly suggest that into. I'm sure it is already. But Rebecca, let's conclude now with the magic wand question. If I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I'm actually going to slightly repeat myself, I think, and come back to when you asked me kind of what success would look like, because I really believe in this idea that if we can quantify the financial impact of aspects of sustainability, it will get the attention of the people that make the decisions that can then make the changes that will result in a better world. It pains me to say it, but sort of money makes the world go around. And so with that realization, why don't we try and make it work for us and kind of wield it almost as a weapon for a stick or a carrot for getting people to make the right actions when it comes to sustainability.
Rebecca, I love it when we get a multi-sided stick and carrot. We used to with the magic wand. It's an odd concept to try and conceive of, but I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to actually give a plug and a shout out to somebody who sits actually on the Anti-Greenwash Charters Council, Johannes Wozenberg, who's been previously on the Responsible Edge as well. Great guy. Their work at S Cubed, which is well worth checking out, is attempting to do a lot of what you've just described and factoring in the negative externalities, as he alludes to, related to operations and financials. So shout out to Johannes, but I think it's a brilliant suggestion. And as you say, what I like about it is it's a very sort of pragmatic, but accessible and pragmatic view of something that should be achievable. And we'll be certainly following, Rebecca, your career as you look to make this happen. But thank you so much for joining me for today's show. It's been a whistle-stop tour. I know it's gone quickly and we haven't touched on everything that we would have liked to, but really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really great chat. I've enjoyed it lots.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Rebecca Ward, Senior Sustainability Strategist at RY and passionate advocate for empowering women and girls, for joining me on today's show. In this episode, we explored how students at William and Mary are using the creative arts to challenge gender stereotypes in STEM. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.